Hey guys, it's Chelsea, and before we dive into this awesome new series, The 15-Minute Budget, I'd like to give a quick shout out to our sponsor, Monarch. So for those of you who don't know, I used to be a Mint power user. I loved that app. It was how I initially started tracking my budget way back when I had a ruined credit score and was like deathly afraid of even looking at my bank accounts. But over the years, it really became like my tool and touchstone to just staying plugged into my financial life, even well after I didn't really need to be worried about my money like that anymore. So when Mint was going away, it was extremely important for me to find the right replacement to become my catch-all budgeting / money management app. So I started using Monarch, which was not only started by some former employees of Mint, but also I find to be a very familiar and easy to use user experience, and just generally makes me feel like I have a hold on my money at all times. The goal of the 15-minute budget is to show you that managing your money doesn't have to be a chore, and Monarch is the perfect tool to help you take the extra energy out of managing that money. You can use it to budget, set goals, and actually understand where your money's going with no guesswork needed on your end. And you don't even have to take my word for it because Monarch was named the best Mint replacement by Forbes. And there are also no ads or selling your financial data to third parties, just a clean, secure app that makes finances feel simple. Monarch helps you manage money your way with a flexible budgeting system that's built for real life, custom categories, and a full view of all your accounts and transactions. You can track your net worth as it grows, which I do, collaborate on finances with a partner, which I do, and create monthly summaries and reports to make your money check-ins stress-free, which I love. Join over 1 million other Monarch users. Head to monarchmoney.com/landing/TFD or the link in our description box and get 50% off your first year with code TFD.
Spreadsheets and pie charts don't work when your nervous system is fried. Just like work burnout, budgeting burnout is what can happen when you are emotionally exhausted and drained, and it impacts your ability to track or stay on top of your monthly budget. Welcome back to the 15-Minute Budget. This is a series that is designed to help you create the right budget for you based on the different personality traits that I see as a financial therapist. I'm Lindsay Bryan-Podvin, certified financial therapist, licensed social worker, and founder of the financial wellness business Mind Money Balance. Today, I'm going to share with you some practical tips to help you deal with budgeting burnout. So things that I tend to see, or personality traits that I tend to see come up if you have budgeting burnout, are things like trying something and feeling like you've somehow failed. This often looks like doing something, but it is too restrictive, and so you can't stick with it, or things work really well until life happens, and then the whole plan falls apart. The other way that I see this show up is if you've had to do something like tap into an emergency fund, and the idea of restarting that emergency fund feels really overwhelming, and you're just burned out on the prospect of having to do something like that again. If you're a person who had to tap into your emergency fund and you're burnt out about the idea of trying to do it again, what you might be doing is telling yourself things like, oh, that emergency fund didn't really matter, or what's the point? And my gentle reminder to you is that if you had to use your emergency fund, you used it for exactly what its purpose was. And even though it can feel daunting to build it back up, you don't have to do it all at once. I'm sure when you initially built up that emergency fund, you didn't do it all in one day, and giving yourself that space and that grace to build it up over time is going to be really helpful. The other way that I always see budgeting burnout show up is if your career or if your work is impacting your life, it can make it really hard to have the time, space, and energy to do the types of personal finance tasks that you need to do in order to maintain a budget. And what you have tried might look like, I am burnt out or I am fried, so I'm just going to take a break for now. I just won't look at my budget this month, or I just won't categorize those expenses. And you tell yourself you'll get to it when you have more time or when you have more energy. And what ends up happening is you delay doing that personal finance task for weeks or maybe months. And then it becomes a bigger and bigger thing and makes it harder for you to actually just go in and do those few tasks that you need to do. And if your career is burning you out, it might also be impacting your budget in ways you haven't thought of. For example, for a lot of my clients who are worker bees, they might do things like, oh, I'll just take this project home tonight, or I'll work on this thing over the weekend, thinking that then they'll have some free time the next week to be able to actually look at their budget. But what often happens is they take that work home, they take that project home, and they end up doing things that maybe they wouldn't have done if they'd left their work at work. For example, they may end up door dashing dinner instead of cooking the groceries that are in the fridge because they simply don't have the time or the energy to cook. The other thing is that when work comes home with you, it can become like this reflex, like you don't really know what to do with your spare time. Instead of doing things like crafting or going to a yoga class or calling a friend, you find yourself just like opening your laptop or checking Slack instead. And while it might not seem directly related, when we lose out on those other outlets of ways to take care of ourselves, it can impact our budget. You've probably tried coping with your burnout by treating yourself, right? This looks like treating yourself to a spa day or to an extra nice pair of shoes. And of course, I'm not against treats, but what can end up happening is you're buying yourself what you feel like is peace of mind or relaxation, and that is eating into your overall budget. So yes, you're taking a break from work, which you do need to do, but it's negatively impacting you in the long run because that break from work is not sustainable and it is impacting your financial bottom line. I've heard so many times that like this mindless spending can happen when we don't really identify why we are spending our money. And when you are in a career that is toxic or very busy or is burning you out, we can find ourselves spending a lot more than we normally would in order to cope with that feeling. This isn't about not trying hard enough or not having enough willpower. This is really your nervous system telling you you have too much on your plate. We have to slow things down. We have to get rid of some things. And your budget isn't serving you because it's too rigid. And what you really need is doable guidelines instead of rigid rules. As we get into the tips for this particular personality type, I want to do a just gentle reminder that a budget is just another way of saying having a plan for your money. This doesn't mean you have to be rigid. It doesn't mean you have to be restrictive. It means that you are in charge of your money. So if you're finding yourself burnt out and it can feel really overwhelming, remember that this is a plan that you create for you. The first tip, if you're burned out at work and it's impacting your budget, is to first start by conducting a career/burnout audit. If your job is burning you out, it can be really hard to zoom out and figure out what the exact source of stress or burnout is. So if you're experiencing that in your work, I want you to ask a few questions to help you decide what the next best step is for you. The first question is, if you made more money, would you feel less burned out? The second question is, if you had fewer tasks, better work boundaries, and kept the same salary, would you feel less burned out? These two questions are helping you to get to the root of, is the money the problem or is the stress of the job the problem? It's not saying that it can't be both, but which one is more impactful to you in this moment? And the answer to that question helps you decide, do I need to advocate for a raise at my current job if you were more in that first question? Or do you need to set up some better boundaries and some better guidelines in your current job if you were more finding yourself in this second question? Okay, I'm gonna throw a little curveball at you. Now, if you are a person who has a good job in that you are getting a really good salary, you have good benefits, good worker flexibility, but the job is just like straight up toxic, I want you to think about how can I get as much out of my job as I need and protect my mental health? So this is really creating an exit strategy for yourself. If you know, it doesn't matter if they put me in a new position, it doesn't matter if they tell me they're going to reduce my workload, I just know that this job is not for me and you know you have to get out. While it can be really tempting to, do that JetBlue exit that went viral, I was going to say a few years ago, but it's probably been like a decade and a half since that happened, and just pull the emergency slide and slide on out of that job, it can feel really tempting to do that. Instead, I want you to think about, what can I get from that job and how much longer do I have to do it before I get that thing? For example, maybe you just have to save up for like 2 more months in order to have a fully funded emergency account, and having that fully funded emergency account would give you peace of mind. Great. Then you have 2 months that you have to stick out that toxic job before you can put in your notice. Kind of in the same vein, are there any benefits that you have not yet taken advantage of at that good job that you need to do before you put in your notice? This might look like getting an annual physical and asking the doctor to write you your prescriptions for as long as possible, right? Can they write you a 90-day script instead of a 30-day script? It also might look like making sure that you take the PTO that you have earned, right? Especially if they don't pay you out, you want to make sure you actually take that time off that you earned. Other benefits that you might want to look into are things like access to legal counsel, or maybe making sure that you get contacts for the year. So making sure you're taking advantage of any benefits that are there before you put in your 2 weeks notice. All right, so coming back to this career burnout audit. So we've already tackled the money piece and the energetic or the tasks piece. The next question I want you to ask in this career burnout audit is, do you have time to engage in hobbies? If you find that you are so burned out at work that you are not engaging in hobbies, that is a cue that we need to do something different. I'm sure I don't have to tell you, but research shows that when we have hobbies and interests outside of work, it is beneficial for our mental health and actually serves as a protective factor against things like depression. Your job doesn't have to be your entire identity, and neither does your side hustle. For example, I love baking and I love helping friends plan their travel itineraries. And anytime somebody tells me, oh my gosh, you could charge for this, I say thank you because it's like a very nice compliment. And I also die inside just a little bit because we are so accustomed to monetizing every single thing in our lives that, like, I just want to remind people you're allowed to have hobbies and you're allowed to have interests just because they feel good. You do not have to monetize them. What we don't want to do, especially if we're dealing with burnout recovery, is make something that is joyful or relaxing all of a sudden another source of stress and trying to think about monetizing something or selling something or marketing something. Please do not do that, especially while you're in the midst of burnout recovery. So that's your career burnout audit. We're talking about how much money you earn, how much responsibility you have at work, whether or not you need to take advantage of some of those benefits if you are going to put your notice in, and making sure that you actually have time to do things that you enjoy. If any of those questions gave you answers you didn't love, my dear friend, it may be time to look for something else. What this has to do with your budget is if you don't even have time to paint your nails at the end of a busy work week, you are not going to have time to categorize your expenses or make sure that your accounts are all connected to one another so you can see that beautiful dashboard at the end of the month. All right, tip number 2 for my budgeting burnout folks. Use your strengths and celebrate your wins. You've done hard things in your life. Maybe you quit smoking, or you finally found a bedtime routine for yourself that doesn't involve doom scrolling. Those are habits that are hard to change, and you had to have done something to help you motivate yourself to be able to stick with it. I want you to go back in time and ask yourself, like, how did I change that habit? How did I change that routine? What were the things that worked for me? Was it having a routine? Was it having external accountability? Was it having some sort of like tracking system that really worked for you? Was it having rewards built in? What was it that helped you to make that behavior change? And when you're thinking about getting back in touch with your monthly budget, what do you need for yourself? Do you need rewards, accountability, a better tracking system? Think about the things that have worked for you in the past, and there's a very good chance that those will help you now as you get back to budgeting. And celebrating those past wins is so important. When we find ourselves like low energy, no energy, completely burned out, it can be hard to remember that life hasn't always felt this way. So going back in time and thinking about the things that you have done and that you have accomplished can help boost your mood a little bit. The next tip is permission to make mistakes and take breaks. When we're in budgeting burnout, it can be really hard to be objective, and looking at our budget at the end of the month and telling ourselves something like, oh my gosh, I overspent by $20 this month can land really heavy and make it hard for us to acknowledge, hey, I only overspent by $5 a week. That's actually not a big deal. I'm sure there are things that I can tweak and change so that moving forward, I stay on budget. But when we're in that burnout, it's really hard to give ourselves permission to make a so-called mistake. And I want you to be able to take a little pause or a little break in between achieving financial goals. When we are in burnout, and quite frankly, just like as people who live in this society, it can be really hard to hang out and celebrate that win, just like I talked about earlier. Let's say you finally paid off a credit card that had been like really getting under your skin. You paid it off, it feels really good, and instead of hanging out there and celebrating that win, you automatically go, okay, well, I paid off that credit card debt. Now I'm going to take the money that I was putting towards that credit card and I'm going to throw it toward my travel fund. I'm not telling you don't put that money toward your travel fund. What I am saying is, like, can you give yourself a beat? Can you give yourself a week where maybe you let yourself have that extra 20, 30, 40 bucks, whatever it was, and treat yourself to something enjoyable? Can you pause and restart that goal, that travel fund goal, the next month and enjoy kind of basking in having a little extra financial cushion for that month? Planning time to just like soak up and celebrate achieving a financial goal is so important, but especially when we are in burnout and it just feels like we're swinging from like vine to vine or monkey bar to monkey bar, whatever image works for you. We want to like hang out and ground ourselves and be like, oh yeah, I did that thing. That's amazing. Do that, not just for yourself, but also invite your friends to celebrate with you too. Speaking of friends, the next tip I have is get some support. Burnout can happen when we feel like we have to do it all alone, or we feel like we are the only person on the planet who has ever gone through this particular experience. That type of I have to do it by myself, or I'm the only one who's ever experienced it, can be really isolating, both literally and emotionally. At work, it might look like, oh, I can't give this task to somebody else on my team because they'll do it wrong, or I have to respond to an email at 9:30 p.m. because that shows that I'm a good worker. And when it comes to your money, that inability to delegate or to have boundaries also has a negative impact. If you don't delegate your tasks, such as you feel like you have to do your budget manually every single month, you might be missing out on letting apps do some of the heavy lifting so you can use your brain and energy in a much better way. Now, when it comes to boundaries and budgeting, you might feel like you can't tell your friends, hey, I can't afford it. So you just don't respond to their text when they say, hey, we're going to this concert next week. We'd love you to come. You can tell them, have a boundary and say, I'd love to come, but I'm actually on a budget right now, or it's not actually in my spending plan right now. So I'll just meet up with y'all for happy hour beforehand, right? If we don't tell people what's going on in our lives, they can't, read our mind and figure out what's going on and why we might be saying no to things. And once we invite our friends into what's going on in our financial life, they also can help us be accountable and provide that extra support, right? Burnout means that we're often carrying a lot of things alone. If your friends know, hey, I'm cutting back on spending, then they can also take initiative and say, hey, the next time we hang out, instead of going to like this pricey jazz club, we can do something like bring drinks over to your house, or we can try out that new hike that we'd been meaning to try out. When you do that, it can be so helpful with that burnout piece. And outside of getting support from things like apps or from people in your life like your friends, don't forget that there are literal resources available in your community to help you if you feel like you are struggling financially. There are resources that are available, from things like food banks to being able to put gas in your car to being able to help you negotiate your energy bill. Please, 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 do not be afraid to reach out and ask for help, especially if you're in burnout mode. It's so, so, so imperative that you get some of that external help and use the services that are available to you. That's why they're there. They wouldn't have services like food banks or emergency funding or the ability to negotiate with your energy company if other people didn't also need it. So please reach out and find some resources around you. I shared with TFD a resource I like to use that works in both the US and Canada, and they will link it in the description box. And another thing to consider within your community are resources like mutual aid. Mutual aid has become like a buzzword among the progressive leftists, but it is really a fancy way of saying a nonprofit without any of the nonprofit bureaucracy. This is where community members are helping community members without all of the paper trailing and bylaws that tend to come with and slow down nonprofits that try to do good, but have to work within the confines of a very complex system. For example, a mutual aid group in my community does a couple of things. They do a once a month free swap. It's exactly what it sounds like. You can go to the locations kind of change, but you can go there and one swap will be really focused on clothes. So you can grab clothes that fit you, your kids, people you are caregiving for. And if you have things that are in good condition, you can also leave them, but there's like no shame or judgment if you can't contribute. Other swaps might focus more on like baby gear. So there may be things like cribs or high chairs and things like that that are available for free. The other thing this mutual aid group does is they make sure that you have functioning headlights, taillights, and turn signals. And it might sound a little bit weird when you're hearing this, but the reason behind it is that when somebody gets pulled over for something like a broken taillight and gets a ticket, that can kind of set off this spiral of falling behind financially. So making sure that you have a working taillight, working signals, and working headlights can be a way to get some support from your community if you're a person who has to drive to and from work or to and from school. So that's an example of mutual aid, but the best way for you to find one in your area is to literally search mutual aid plus your city, your county, your state to see what pops up. All right, so a reminder of these tips are to conduct a career burnout audit, use your strengths, celebrate your wins, give yourself permission to make mistakes and take breaks, and ask for support. All right, your one action item this week. I want you to pick one thing on your to-do list and get rid of it. Is there something there that you can eliminate, that you can get rid of, that you can reduce to take away from this feeling of burnout? So often we think we have to add more to our plates. And so if you're in burnout, I want you to do some self-care by subtraction. That's it for today. I'll see you here real soon for the next video in the 15-minute budget series.